There is a voice inside you right now that has never once told you the truth. Not because it is lying to hurt you, but because it was never yours to begin with. It was handed to you by a teacher who feared your ambition, by a parent who mistook obedience for love, by a culture that has spent centuries teaching the weak to call their weakness virtue and the strong to call their strength sin. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his entire life listening to that voice, in himself, in the priests, in the philosophers, in the herd. And he came to a conclusion so dangerous that most people still refuse to look directly at it. He said that morality itself, the very voice inside your head that tells you what you're allowed to want, what you're allowed to become, was not discovered. It was invented. Invented by people too weak to seize life themselves, who found a way to punish everyone who could. You are walking around today, speaking to yourself in a language you did not design, obeying commandments you never agreed to, and calling the result your personality. Nietzsche did not ask you to think positive. He asked you to ask a far more brutal question. Who gave you that voice, and why does it keep you small? This is not a video about affirmations. Nietzsche despised comfortable lies almost as much as he despised comfortable people. This is about something harder and far more honest. Learning to speak to yourself the way a creator speaks, instead of the way an animal that has been trained to fear the whip speaks. Because that is what most inner dialogue actually is, not wisdom, training. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. If this lands somewhere real, subscribe to Nietzsche philosophy and hit like, because what follows will ask you to do something most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Look directly at the voice running your life and ask if it deserves the throne it's sitting on. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche describes 3 transformations the spirit must pass through. The first is the camel. The camel kneels down and asks to be loaded. It wants weight on its back. The heavier the better, because the camel has confused suffering with worth. It carries the sacred thou shalt of everyone who came before it. Thou shalt not be arrogant. Thou shalt not want too much. Thou shalt not think yourself special. Thou shalt be grateful for less. And then it walks out into the desert alone, proud of how much it can endure. This is the first stage of your inner voice, and almost nobody escapes it. Listen to how you actually talk to yourself. I shouldn't want that. Who do I think I am? I need to be realistic. Other people have it worse, so I have no right to complain. Every one of these is a thou shalt you inherited and never once examined. You did not write that law. You are simply carrying it, the way the camel carries whatever is loaded onto it, mistaking the weight for character. The camel's task is not to throw the load off yet. The camel's task is to become honest about what it's carrying. So your first movement is not transformation, it's an inventory. For a few days, simply notice. When the voice inside you says, I can't, ask whose law is that? When it says that's selfish, ask who benefits from me believing that. When it calls your ambition too much, ask what kind of person needed you to be less. You are not looking for someone to blame. You are looking for the shape of the cage, so that later you can find the bars. There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness. Even your inherited voice had a reason once. Understand it before you fight it. The second transformation is the lion. The lion does not kneel and ask for more weight. The lion goes into the desert to become master of it, and there it meets a great dragon whose every scale gleams with the words, thou shalt. The dragon says all value has already been created, and I am that value. There shall be no more I will. And the lion's entire purpose, the only reason the spirit becomes a lion at all, is to say no to that dragon. Not
no as rebellion for its own sake. No as the first act of a creature that has decided it will no longer be owned by an inherited law. Freedom is the will to be responsible for ourselves. The lion's roar is not noise. It is the sound of a creature refusing for the first time to let someone else's voice narrate its life. This is the stage almost everyone skips because it is the most uncomfortable one. It requires you to catch the old sentence mid-flight and say, out loud if you have to, no. Not maybe I'm being too hard on myself, not a gentle correction, a refusal. When the old voice says, you'll fail, you always do, the lion does not negotiate with it. The lion says, that is not law, that is a corpse of an old fear wearing my voice, and I will not obey it. Practice this like a discipline, not a mood. Every time the inherited voice issues a command dressed up as truth, you shouldn't try, you're not the type, that's not who you are, meet it the way the lion meets the dragon. Not with self-pity, not with a pep talk, but with contempt for the lie and refusal to kneel to it again. Notice what the lion cannot yet do, though. The lion can only say no. It clears the ground. It does not build. For that, something else is required. The third transformation is the child. And this is the part almost nobody expects, because we associate children with weakness, and Nietzsche is associating the child with the highest form of strength there is. The child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelled wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes. The lion could destroy the old law. Only the child can create a new one. Why? Because creation requires innocence, a willingness to want something simply because you want it, without first getting permission from the dead voices of the past. The child does not ask, "Am I allowed to want this?" The child wants, and that wanting is its own justification. This is where your inner dialogue finally stops being a courtroom and becomes a workshop. You stop asking the old question, "Is this thought allowed?" and start asking the only question that matters to a creator. Is this thought mine, and does it build something I actually want to exist? So here is the practice. When you catch the old inherited voice, the camel's law, the dragon's command, do not simply delete it and leave silence behind. Silence is not freedom. It's just an empty throne, and the old voice will crawl back onto it out of habit. Instead, create the replacement, the way a child invents a game with no rulebook to consult. Where the old voice said, "I can't," the child does not say the timid opposite, "I can." The child says something with will in it, "I am going to find out." Where the old voice said, "I'm not good enough," the child says, "Good enough for whom? I am building my own measure." Where the old voice whispered, "Stay small, it's safer," the child laughs, because the child has never once confused safety with living. This is not positive thinking. Positive thinking is still asking permission, just from a kinder judge. The child asks no one. Here's where most self-improvement philosophy quietly lies to you, and where Nietzsche refuses to. He does not tell you to hate the camel you were, or resent the years you spent obeying a law you never chose. He tells you the opposite, and it is one of the strangest, hardest teachings he ever offered. Amor Fati, love of fate. Love everything, including the parts of your story you'd erase if you could. My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that wants nothing to be other than it is, not in the future, not in the past, not in all eternity. This matters enormously for how you speak to yourself, because most people's inner voice is still fighting the past, still arguing with the version of them who made the mistake, still interrogating the years spent small. That fight is exhausting, and it is also, Nietzsche would say, a failure of nerve. A being strong enough to create its own values is strong enough to say yes even to that, even to the years I
wasted obeying the wrong law. Even to that failure, it made the hand that is now capable of writing something better. You do not need to forgive the old voice like a saint. You need something harder and more useful. You need to stop being at war with your own history, because a creature at war with its past has no strength left to build its future. Now Nietzsche hands you the single sharpest tool he ever built, and it applies directly to the sentences running through your head all day. Imagine, he says, a demon appears to you and tells you that this exact life, every thought, every choice, every private cruelty you've inflicted on yourself in the silence of your own mind will recur, unchanged, infinite times. Not as punishment, as fact. What if some day or night a demon were to steal into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, "This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more"? Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon? Or, and this is the test, would something in you rise up and say, "Never have I heard anything more divine"? Use this. Before you speak to yourself the way you've always spoken to yourself, the contempt, the small cruelties, the automatic self-doubt you don't even notice anymore, ask the question honestly. Would I be willing to have this exact inner monologue on repeat forever as the defining music of my existence? Or is this a sentence I am only saying out of habit, one I would never choose if I had to own it eternally? Most of what runs through your head fails this test instantly. It was never chosen. It was inherited, the camel's law again, dressed up as your own opinion. The eternal recurrence is not a fantasy about time. It's a filter. It asks every thought, are you worthy of being repeated forever?
Or are you just noise I never questioned? People misread will to power as a philosophy of conquering others. Nietzsche meant something far more demanding, the will to overcome yourself, again and again, without end. He that cannot obey himself will be commanded. That is the nature of noble souls. Every time you let the old inherited voice command you without resistance, you are being commanded by a dead law, by someone else's fear, wearing your own voice as a disguise. Will to power, applied to how you speak to yourself, means this: you do not get to be ruled by a sentence you never examined. You examine it. You either conquer it or you keep it, but you never again let it rule you by default. This is uncomfortable work, and Nietzsche never promised it would feel good. You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes? The old inner voice, the comfortable, familiar, inherited one, has to burn. What rises from that is not gentler, it is stronger, and it is finally actually yours. There is a war happening inside you every single day, and Nietzsche gave it a name: master morality against slave morality, and both of them are trying to speak in your voice. Slave morality calls confidence arrogance, it calls ambition greed, it calls solitude loneliness, and calls conformity kindness. It was built, historically, by those who could not win by strength, so they redefined strength itself as sin, and taught everyone, including the strong, to distrust their own power. When your inner voice flinches at your own ambition, when it apologizes for taking up space, when it calls your highest hopes unrealistic before you've even tried, that is slave morality, and it has been narrating your life in the first person for years. Master morality does not ask permission to want things. It calls good whatever expands life, and calls bad whatever shrinks it. Nothing more mysterious than that. It does not need an external judge, because it has become its own lawgiver. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. The voice you're trying to build is not a nicer version of the old judge. It's the end of the judge altogether, replaced by someone who creates value instead of policing it. This is Nietzsche's strangest, most demanding line, and it is the
1. To carry out of this video, become who you are, not who you were told to be, not who is easiest, safest, most forgivable to the herd. He is not describing some hidden, finished self waiting patiently to be discovered, like a costume in a closet. He means something closer to a command, that you are not given, you are made, sentence by sentence, choice by choice, in exactly the tone you use with yourself when no one else is listening. Every day you spend obeying the camel's inherited law is a day you postpone becoming anything at all. Every time you say no to the dragon, you clear a little more ground. Every time you speak like the child, inventing rather than obeying, you lay one more stone of the self you are actually building, instead of the one you are assigned. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Your why cannot be borrowed. It has to be created, in your own voice, by you. Nietzsche did not offer comfort, and neither will this video pretend to. What he offered was harder, and, if you actually use it, far more valuable. The demand that you stop being ruled by a voice you never chose, and start becoming the kind of creature capable of choosing one. The camel kneels. The lion says no. The child says yes, on its own terms, to its own life, for the first time. Which one is speaking in your head right now? Subscribe to Nietzsche Philosophy for more on the ideas that don't comfort you. They arm you, and if this reached something real, send it to someone who is still waiting for permission to become who they are.